Welcome, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute students. My name is Richard Rosenthal. I will be teaching two classes related to the Supreme Court. They are each 4-week sessions. They are separate classes, but I also kind of view them as a unit. So if you're able to take both courses, so much the better. I think you'll find the class interesting. It will be freewheeling and open-ended, and it'll be informal, as is my nature, as you can probably tell. And obviously, this course comes at a very significant and portentous time for our country, for the Supreme Court, and we're going to discuss all of those things. There will be time in every class for Q&A, for questions and answers, and for discussions of upcoming decisions as they are released by the Supreme Court. But there is a structure to the course that will generally follow with some variations each week. And I wanted to walk through that with you. Again, be two segments of 4 weeks each. And let me talk to you about what each week I envision being, with some modifications as events dictate. The first week of the first class, week one, we will begin with the origins of judicial review, the so-called Lochner decision, and we will talk about the origins of the Supreme Court as an institution, under the auspices of Chief Justice Marshall, John Marshall, and what the Lochner decision and John Marshall's stewardship of the court meant for our American democracy and for the court itself. The second week, we will zip ahead quite a bit into the 20th century and talk about the role of the court during the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his New Deal legislation, the so-called Lochner era of the court, in which the court became a much more significant player in the events of the national scene and national policy. And we'll discuss whether that's been a positive or a negative. In week three, we will zip again ahead into the 1950s and 1960s to the court under the stewardship of Earl Warren, the so-called Warren Court, and the so-called rights revolution of the 1950s and 1960s, in which the court took a firm hold on the social and cultural decisions of the day and the issues, and what that has meant for the modern day Supreme Court and for our democracy. Week four of the first course will be a slight left-hand turn in what I call dark, shameful chapters of the court. And you all can decide whether we are in one of those right now. But we're going to talk about historically some of the worst decisions the Supreme Court has ever issued. And I will even give you my personal top 10 list of worst Supreme Court decisions. And we'll discuss what can be done when the Supreme Court gets it horribly, awfully wrong, which they sometimes do. That will be a natural segue if you take both courses, both 4-week segments, into part two. And the second course will begin in week one with the more modern day Rehnquist Court and John Roberts Court, what I call so-called the counter-revolution. You might call it the Empire Strikes Back, the reaction to what the Warren Court did in the 1950s and 1960s. And some would argue we are now in the late stages of that counter-revolution. We'll discuss that. In week two of the second segment, we will discuss the confirmation wars, the modern day wars that happen every time there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court and what that entails. And I have a little bit of a special insight to that process because I actually did testify to the Senate Judiciary Committee on behalf of one of the nominees to the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I will tell you all about that. I'll give you some insider stuff that you might not have otherwise heard. So I hope you'll certainly come and participate in that class. I think you'll find it interesting. In the third week of the second segment, we are going to talk about the court from some theoretical and global perspectives. And I think you will find that week particularly interesting, I hope, because we're going to pose some topics and ideas that maybe you haven't thought of, and we'll look around the globe at what other democracies are doing with their courts and their constitutions. And maybe perhaps we can draw some valuable lessons from them. In the final week, week four of the second segment, we will look to the future, what lies ahead. And of course, we will keep an eye on all of the decisions that the Supreme Court is issuing in its current term, and we will discuss those. And we will ask the ultimate question, which frames the title of these two courses, the U.S. Supreme Court. Is it the last bastion of democracy, or is it a failed institution? And we will discuss that. I'll be eager to hear your views and your input on that, and with the historical basis that these 4 or 8 weeks provide, I think you'll have a healthy basis to form your own opinions about whether the Supreme Court is the last bastion of democracy or is it a failed institution? So I hope you'll join us. Again, my name is Richard Rosenthal, and I look forward to seeing you. I hope you'll take these classes. Thank you.